a normal alveolus. And you guys have this layer of water, right, that lines the inside of your alveolus. And I'm going to kind of over-exaggerate it, kind of like this. And I'm going to put some water molecules in here. Some squeaky water molecules, apparently. They're chirpers. And we'll put one more in here. And my glue is dying. Alright. The dashed lines are hydrogen bonding, don't forget. H bonds. Alright. Whoops. Someone's going to step on that and bust their neck. Alright, try the other blue one. Oh shit, that's in the lecture room. That sucks. Then those won't work very well either. That's going to be hydrogen bonding. It'll be all sweet. Alright, now, what do septal cells produce? And what does surfactant do?
Reduces surface tension.
Slow down. My dad used to charge 25 cents for every swear word in the house. I'm going to charge $1 for every impromptu answer to a question. You guys have to slow down. Alright? So we have septal cells that produce surfactant. So my red could be surfactant. Alright? And we know that surfactant, just to beat Dave to the punch, lowers hydrogen bonding. Okay, that's my normal little lung scenario over here. Now over here, we are going to have a little land, a little sand, and some mountain ranges up here. And we're going to come over here to sea level. And this is dying on me. Never happened to good markers.
Is that an alveoli or
It's an alveolus,
alveolus?
which we've been showing a couple times. That is an alveolus, yes.
Killer hat.
It is. It's going to keep the sun out of my eyes. What is the pressure at sea level? Atmospheric pressure at sea level. How many millimeters of mercury? 760, all right. We got to get you guys to be a little more forthcoming with information. All right. A, that means I know you know it. But two, you got to get out of your quiet shells. They're not going to serve you in the real world. All right. What's the partial pressure of O2? Does anybody remember? Not 220.
22. 21.
No, not 21. That's the percent of. I want to know the partial pressure.
Oh, 160.
160. Very good. PO2 is 160. And we know how we calculated that. You should remember how we calculated that. Now, what is the percent of oxygen?
21.
At sea level, 21%. Very good. There we go. We have all of our little toys. They're O2, right? 21%. All right. I think I mentioned to you guys this, that I really don't have a feel for what 760 millimeters of mercury is. I can't get my head wrapped around it. So like saying newtons, all right, for physics. But I do understand pounds per square inch. Right, we're going to translate 760 millimeters of mercury into pounds per square inch. And right now at sea level, there's how many pounds, Dave?
14.7.
There's 14.7 pounds per square inch pushing against you. Pounds per inch squared. So there's 14.7 against the back of my head, on my torso, on my legs, right? Everywhere on me, I am being squeezed by 14.7 pounds per square inch. Now, let's go higher in altitude. Let's try and go maybe up to here. I'm trying to hang on for dear life. And I'm at 23,000 feet. I don't expect you guys to know the actual atmospheric pressure, but it's going to be 300 millimeters of mercury at 23,000 feet. when I calculate the partial pressure, which you guys should be able to do, right, is going to give you a PO2 of roughly 60. Right? Now let's look at and compare that to sea level. What is the PO2 at sea level? That's a really quiet response. What's the PO2 level, everybody, at sea level? 160. And according to this, at 23,000 feet, what's the PO2 value now?
160.
Okay, it's only 60, right? It's 1/3 basically, not 160. Did you say 160 there back there?
That was an accident.
That was an accident, okay. Never say oops in the operating room. Okay, so let's do this. Let's remind ourselves of what happens in our lungs. So you have another alveolus, you have another pulmonary capillary coming by, and we have a layer of water that's in there. And of course you've all memorized the PO2 value inside the alveolus, right? 105. And what does Henry's gas law say? You had all weekend to memorize it, to learn it. You should have by now. If you haven't, we need to give you a little kick in the butt and get you going. But what does Henry's gas law say? The amount of the gas that dissolves into a liquid is proportional to the partial pressure of that gas above the liquid. Translation, how much gas goes into a liquid is determined by the partial pressure of that gas right above it. So the level of PO2 in here determines how much O2 goes in there. And that will diffuse into my capillaries. Well, look at the PO2 in the atmosphere. It's 160. It's 105 in the lungs. And what gas law did we just say this is representative of? That's Henry's gas law, right? Because that determines how much O2 eventually gets into my pulmonary capillaries based upon the PO2 inside of my, there we go. So let's look at this here. If this is sea level, right? Let's come down over here and look at this idea. Another layer of water, another pulmonary capillary coming by. It doesn't have to be pretty. Now you don't have to do any math, but let's simply just ask this. If the PO2 at sea level was 160, and the PO2 in my lungs at sea level 105, that determines how much goes into my capillaries because of Henry's gas law. Being at a higher altitude with an atmospheric pressure now of a PO2 of 60 and not 160, is it safe to say I'll have a lower PO2 in my lungs than compared to sea level?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's lower outside, right? Do all of you see that? You're okay with that? Less outside means less inside. If I have less inside, will less go into my pulmonary capillaries?
Yes.
It has to because of Henry's gas law, right? If this is a lower number compared to this, then this has to be lower compared to that. And if this is lower, then this has to be lower. And it's the nice little basic simple rule of relationship. So if this is lower, then that'll be lower, which means that will be lower. Whoops, not dude, an L. So if, oh, okay, that's one important question. What's my percent of oxygen at 23,000 feet?
21%.
So how come I'm getting tired then at high altitude?
You get more carbon dioxide?
No. If this is still 21%, which is correct, all right? All that says is that the percentage of gas at that altitude is at 21% of oxygen, right? What is Henry's gas law all about? Is it about percentages of gases or partial pressures of gases?
Partial pressure.
Partial pressures. Partial pressures determines how much goes into my blood. What happened to the partial pressure of O2 the higher I went? It went lower. If this gets lower, that has to get lower. That's why you have a difficulty in high altitudes. It isn't the percentage of oxygen, it's the pressure of oxygen gets lower. There's less of a pushing force to dissolve into your blood. That's why you fatigue. The percent is still 21. You just have a lower partial pressure at 21%. Because you're at higher altitudes. And let's make sure that that makes sense before we go anywhere else. Because we're going to go in the opposite.
Can you explain that last part one last time?
What last part?
About the lower partial pressure and why we get fatigued.
It's simply the idea that, do you see that in higher altitude, my PO2 would be lower in the altitude?
Yeah.
All right. What does that mean in terms of how much goes in my lungs then?
We get lower.
What does that mean in terms of what goes into my blood?
Lower.
That's it, you just said it,
Okay.
right? Why do things go from one place to another?
Pressure.
Diffusion, right? Differences in pressure. I know Henry's gas law is about partial pressures and the ability of a gas to dissolve into a liquid. So if partial pressure is what determines how much goes in, if I have a lower partial pressure, then less gets in.
Sweet.
And less in means less to use for your mitochondria, which is why you guys get tired.
So where the hypoxia comes in?
Oh, it might, yeah. Does that part make sense? Everybody okay with that? All right, so let's go over here and look at this conversation in a different direction. If higher in altitude meant a lower atmospheric pressure, let's go back and remember how we calculated partial pressures in the first place. All right, the partial pressure of a gas was equal to the pressure of the system, whatever it was, right, times the percent of a gas. That's how I calculate partial pressures. Can I influence the partial pressure of atmospheric gas around me? Really, I can change
Sure,
the
you can put it on an oxygen mask.
I'm not changing the partial, I'm not changing the atmospheric pressure. I'm changing maybe the partial pressure, but I'm changing the atmospheric pressure. I can't take space and say, hey, become 900 millimeters of mercury, right? I can't do that. But can I change the pressure anywhere else? Where? Those of you that are nodding your heads, put your money where your mouth is, okay. Where can I change pressures?
Yeah, around us.
No, can't do that.
Can we change pressure in our lungs?
I can change pressure in your lungs.
Or are we changing pressure? Are we talking about going underwater?
Can I do this?
Yeah.
Doesn't this say this?
Yeah.
Now normally we've always talked about changing volume to cause change in pressures. Is there a way I can use that to my advantage at 23,000 feet?
Oxygen tank?
That's Henry's gas law again, dude.
Okay.
Is there a way for me to change the pressure that this system is operating in? Because if I can change the pressure, I can change partial pressures, but I can't change the percent of gas that I'm breathing in unless I use an air tank or not. I don't have one of those. So is there a way I can manipulate this equation to my advantage? And the answer is yes, we're going to show you how to do this. One of my grad advisors at UW liked to go high altitude hiking. He liked to climb Everest. He's old school. He wouldn't bring any supplements with him. So in our advanced physiology class, he made us practice the breathing technique that he used on Everest. And I want you all to do it. Not necessarily right now, but I want you to do it at home if you won't do it right here. So we gotta imagine a bunch of graduate students in this room acting like a bunch of baby elephants. What noise? I want you to make the sound of a baby elephant. Right now, make the sound of a baby elephant. Come on! That's not what a baby elephant is. What does a baby elephant sound like? Think about it. And then make that noise.
I do not know. Reach
Reach into your 5-year-old inside of you, rip it out, and become 5, and pretend to be a baby elephant. No.
Oh, that was good.
Do that. You feel the pressure inside of you increasing?
Yeah.
Feel the pressure in your thoracic cavity increasing?
Yeah.
If I change the pressure, what happens to partial pressure?
It changes.
If I increase the pressure in my chest, can I increase the partial pressure of a gas in my lungs?
Yes.
Can I then put more oxygen in my blood?
Yes.
That's the breathing technique of high altitude hikers. It's called pressure pulse breathing.
That would be so hard to do.
Oh, it takes a lot of work, right?
That would be like.
But there's also a relatedness to it. Does anybody know the term of the Valsalva maneuver?
Oh, yeah.
So what is it?
The Valsalva maneuver is to voluntarily open the eustachian tubes, equalize pressure in the inner ear for depth changes underwater. Or in the air, you can do it in the air,
Yeah.
but it's more necessary when you dive. You have to do it to dive.
That's true. And it's also, though, a problem that people have when they are constipated. And people tend to... Sorry. Ah! Here's the difference. When I do the baby elephant, I'm letting air pass through my lips. Pretend you're blowing on a tuba or a trumpet or a trombone. Folks who hold their breath and bear down when they're constipated aren't letting the gas out. They raise their blood pressure. They can rupture capillaries. So you must always exhale. It's the same idea as if you go into a gym and you lift weights. You always exhale as you lift the weight, all right, to reduce the pressure. But you can do this in high altitude. Yes, it really wears you out apparently. I've never done any true high altitude hiking, but that's how he would do, right? Because I know I can manipulate this by making it harder for the air to leave my mouth. Because increased diameter means increased resistance, which means pressures go up.
Is he doing this as he summits Mount Everest?
Yeah,
Whoa.
he wouldn't use the tank.
Wow.
All right, so does all this so far make sense? Higher in altitude means lower pressure. Lower pressure means lower what?
Lower.
Oh my gosh.
Higher in altitude means lower atmospheric pressure, which then means lower what?
Lower PO2.
Lower partial pressures. All right, we gotta start getting you guys out of your quiet shells. All right, well, let's look at it in this context. All right. Squeakiness.
You doing water now?
We're doing water now. And we're gonna make you the guinea pig.
Sweet.
All right, Scott, you're snorkeling. You ever snorkel, Scott?
Yeah.
What do you breathe when you snorkel?
Air.
What's in air?
Oxygen and some CO2.
What else?
Nitrogen.
What else?
CO2.
Okay. How much of my air is oxygen?
21%.
Okay. How much of it is nitrogen?
The most, but I don't know the percentage right now.
79% roughly, right?
Yeah.
And so we're pretty much already wiped out, but CO2 is 0.4%.
That's right.
All right, so when you breathe in, you're breathing lots of nitrogen, a little bit of oxygen, and just a little pinch of CO2. Anybody here a scuba diver? Okay. When was the last time you went diving?
It was last year.
Okay. Do you use dive cards?
It
You
was
have
on
one of those
Christmas.
little fancy watches now.
Well, usually I rent the gear, so they give me the computer, but I use the dive card anyway, because, you
It's
know.
a pain in the ass to use, but yes.
Well, it's fun to think about the body time and oxygen, nitrogen
Okay.
saturation and all that.
So, we know that nitrogen is very low in solubility, right? Because I told you guys so. So, even though it's the major gas in my air, it's the major gas involved in perhaps ventilation, very little actually gets into my blood because very little of it can dissolve in that liquid layer, so I don't really get it into my bloodstream. But now, if we go through, and we're going to ask Dave to hold off on the answer to this, because since he does dive, he might know the answer really quickly, but I don't want him to supply the answer. If I want to go scuba diving, what is that thing on my back called?
Air tank.
Tank.
Sorry.
David.
Let's all stare at Dave for about 30 seconds. We're just going to laser beam him with eyeball hooks.
Oxygen.
All right, it is not an oxygen tank, everybody.
Is it a nitrogen tank?
It's not a nitrogen tank. It's an air tank. Because what's in the tank?
All of it.
Air. That's why it's called an air tank. So when you scuba dive, what are you breathing? 21% oxygen, 7% nitrogen, and a little pinch of CO2. That's what I'm breathing. All right? But nitrogen isn't very soluble, so I can care less. Maybe. Starting at about the 10-foot mark, you now have to be concerned. For every 33 feet that we go down, you're going to get an increase of 1 atmosphere of pressure. So at sea level, right, 0 feet, I have 14.7 pounds pushing against me. But at 33 feet, you have 14.7 times 2. And at 66 feet, you have 14.7 times 3. And for every 33 feet, you add another 14.7 pounds. So at 99 feet, the limit of recreational diving, you have 4 times atmospheric pressure pushing against you, which is hard for a lot of you to envision. So here's one way you can envision this. If you don't have at home those rubber gloves you use for cleaning dishes or maybe the toilets with, right? Get a pair of rubber gloves, not surgical gloves, the thick rubber Playtex ones. Put your hand in one of them, fill the sink 2/3 with water, and put your hand in the sink of water. Notice what happens to the glove. It's going to begin to squeeze against your hand. That's water pressure, right? And you're only talking about 12 inches of water. Imagine now 33 feet worth of water. If you can, think about your memory of diving into the deep end of a 15-foot pool, right? You actually feel the pressure of water begin to squeeze you. When you go down in depth, basically it's like getting a giant hug from the ocean. You are literally being squeezed by an anaconda of water. Every part of you is being squeezed, right? So it's basically like doing this. Hold your arm out, all right? This is deep diving. I'm just squeezing, right? I'm compressing all of our tissues. So if I compress and I make volume smaller, what happens to pressures? Boyle's law, right? The pressure in you is going up. What's going to happen then to your lung volume the further down I go? Will the volume get smaller?
Yeah.
What happens to the partial pressure of gases in my lungs? They're going to go up?
Smaller.
No, they're gonna go. Oh, wait, they're gonna go up.
Let's try that again. As I go further down, my lungs become smaller. What happens to the pressure in my lungs?
It goes up.
What happens to the partial pressure of any gas in my lungs?
It goes up.
Isn't that cool for oxygen? I get more O2 in my blood. That's fantastic.
Yeah, you get nitrogen.
Right? But everybody else also gets an increase in their partial pressures. And starting at 10 feet, nitrogen becomes soluble. We don't need much more, all right? Because I know that at sea level, this is about 600. I know this is 160, right? This is at sea level. But right about there. So notice this nice little trend. If I'm up here at 23,000 feet, and I start getting lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower, what's happening to the pressure around me? It's going up. What happens to the partial pressure of the gases in my system? It goes up, right? And to a point, that's really quite helpful and quite beneficial. So now, this is the end of recreational diving. So we're going to go here. Now, being that light gray might make the spots becoming hypoxic. So order this one. All right, so we're down here tootling around at the limits of recreational diving. And I have a little radio and I tell Scott that I'm about to finish the last case of beer and eat the last pizza. And he doesn't want me to do that. So he's going to, within the next 2.5 minutes, maybe 3, he's going to shoot straight up to the surface to grab the last case of beer.
Not good.
All right? Why is it not a good idea, Scott?
So you can get too much nitrogen, right?
Well, so let's look at what's happened here.
Or, yeah, air.
Let's go and draw your reveal list. All right? If you guys can draw a picture of a question, then you can see the answer. So let's draw this. We're looking at now the PN2. Is the PN2 higher at 99 feet than it was at sea level or lower?
It's higher than.
It's a lot higher, right? So you get a big increase in the partial pressure of nitrogen, which means it'll probably now go into that layer of liquid surrounding the inside of my lungs, which means it'll probably then go into my blood. So I'll have dissolved nitrogen. I'll get out of the way in a second. Now, what does dissolved nitrogen look like? Go back to my lecture on that Coke bottle. All right? Don't disturb the Coke bottle. You see a nice dark solution, but do you see the dissolved CO2 in that Coke? You don't see it, right? But it's there, it's dissolved. Now, that's me tootling around, or Scott, at 99 feet, right? It's under pressure, the gases are dissolved, no harm, no foul, no big deal. He wants that last couple of slices of the pizza because I'm threatening to eat it, so he makes a rapid ascent to the top. This is what it would be like. Take that bottle, slide it on the table, and then pop the lid off. What's going to happen?
Bubbles.
You see bubbles coming out of solution, right? right? Where are those bubbles gonna go? Wherever you allow them to go. Well, that's what happens in your blood. The nitrogen becomes undissolved. It forms bubbles in your blood. And those bubbles will accumulate where, David?
Capillaries, everywhere.
And then be a
And
little,
joints, every place they can.
what's the term for the joints? What kind of joint are we
synovial
talking about?
cavities.
Synovial joints, synovial cavities. Every synovial cavity will start to fill up and expand with nitrogen gas. And gee, what joints are those again? That's going to be these and these and these and those and this and this and vertebral and hip and pelvic and knees and toes and ankles.
Only the ones that move.
Even the ones that don't move, right? So here's what it's like. You guys know about the rack? Medieval torture, right? Tie you up and pull you apart from the outside.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to push you apart from the inside. Right? That's why I got the name the bends, because you would bend over in pain. Because the gases will accumulate in your joints, but also little bubbles have this really nasty behavior of binding to other little bubbles, forming bigger bubbles. Now I've got a big bubble trying to go into a small arteriole. You have a bubble cork. Nothing will pass that point. That means whatever is downstream becomes hypoxic. It'll bind in your capillaries of your brain, causing them to rupture. Cerebral hemorrhaging. Not a good idea. All right? So to avoid that, what divers do, Dave, is what?
Safety stop. And
What's a safety stop?
Well, there's two things. You don't ascend faster than 1 foot per second, and the safety stop is at minimum 3
How the hell do I
minutes.
know what 1 foot per second is?
Because
Give me a, you have a rule of thumb?
you're always exhaling,
And what do you
float
follow?
with your bubbles.
Stay slower than your bubbles. That's a nice little rule of thumb.
Yeah.
All right?
And then you stop at 5 meters for at least 3 minutes.
Okay. So what it's basically saying is this. Depending on my depth and my little card I have, or my little computerized watch, it says, dude, you've been down to 99 feet for, let's say, 45 minutes. Just to give you an analogy, a quick rule of thumb. If you don't have a dive card, don't have a watch. The rule of halves. I'm going to go from 90 feet or 99 feet to 50 feet. Spend about 30 minutes there. Let's go from 99 feet to 66 feet. What happens to the partial pressure of nitrogen as I go shallower and shallower? It goes down, right? Now, what made it become soluble was a higher PO2. So the lower the PO2, the more the gas wants to come out of solution. So what you do is you go to a shallower depth. You know that due to physics, the gases are going to be starting to come out of solution. But the whole idea is that I'm going to sit at maybe 66 feet, spend a half an hour ventilating, exhaling out. And what is in that exhalation? Well, it's going to be the nitrogen that was dissolved. I'm giving it a path to get the hell out of my system. I do it until I reach an equilibrium at that depth, at that partial pressure. Then I go to maybe 33 feet, spend another half an hour there, right? Again, I've lowered the partial pressure a bit more. I wait for an equilibrium to occur. Then I can go to maybe 15 feet, another half an hour, which is really way too long. But the idea is that I'm going shallower and shallower, spending time at a certain depth, waiting for an equilibrium to be achieved, then going to another gradient, establishing that, waiting for another equilibrium, then another gradient, and wait for that equilibrium until I finally reach the surface. It may take you as long as your dive to reach an equilibrium. Now, there are some people that are really absolute apeshit nuts that work for communications companies and oil companies, and they live on the ocean floor. They might live at 1,000 feet, and they will spend 6 months in a decompression habitat before they can actually open the door and walk on land. Because they're down for so long, their tissues are just saturated with nitrogen.
Well, and even they're usually breathing heliox, but they still are. But there's still some nitrogen.
Oh yeah, well, because we'll get to that in a second, right? So now, what if though, let's say Scott was an ex-SEAL, and he's tough as gridiron, and he's willing to pay the consequence of getting the bends to get that last, because I know some SEALs, and they're that stupid, right? But he realized that I have this really big, so I have a really big ship, and there's this long cylindrical structure on the back of my ship that has a little door handle on it that I could open up like a human pressure cooker,
Decompression tank?
otherwise known as a hyperbaric chamber maybe?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he comes up in pain and agony, but happy that he has his pizza and beer. He takes it all into that chamber. So now Scott is inside. There's your beer.
Can you even eat or drink it?
Oh yeah, you can drink it. Okay. Now, they're gonna close the door, and they're gonna go, well, how far down were you? 100 feet. All right. They're gonna probably take you to 110 feet. What have they done to the partial pressure in that chamber?
Increased it?
They've increased it, right? What happens to the undissolved nitrogen?
Goes back in the solution.
Right? Do you guys all agree that it's going to become more soluble back into solution again? Right? Pain's gone. Over the next many, many hours, maybe 1 millimeter per 5 minutes, I slowly lower the pressure in the chamber, which lowers the partial pressure, which allows me to exhale the gas that were dissolved in my blood, and eventually I can get most of the CO2 that, most of the nitrogen that was dissolved in my blood, I can get it to be pumped out of the chamber. But you're not out of the woods just yet. For the next 2 days, you can't go flying.
Oh yeah.
Why can't you go flying for the next 2 days? Oh. There's what?
The pressure in a plane is different, so
Hmm.
like alter.
All right, and as I warned the first lab group, no laughing at my artistic work. That's not a thumbnail or a toenail, right? That's, all right. We'll give you a first class window. There's a first class window. You can actually sit inside. Right. And then we're gonna give you modern wings. And my first airplanes, propellers, didn't have jet engines. All right, so how high do airplanes fly? What's the normal cruising altitude, you guys know?
35,000 feet.
About 30, 35,000 feet, kind of depends upon whoever it is.
Halo.
Now, let's just think about this. What would the PO2 be at 30,000 feet? You don't have to have anything actually calculated, but look at common sense general rules. I know sea level, and you're going to memorize sea level. What happened between sea level and 23,000 feet? What happened to atmospheric pressure?
It would be like PO2 40.
What happened to the partial pressure of O2? Looks at the dude, go up and went down, right? So now if I compare 23,000 to 30,000, what happened to atmospheric pressure between those 2 points?
Went down.
What happened to partial pressure of any gas? It went down, right? So how come you guys just aren't flying out passed out in the airplane? Because you're at 33,000 feet. You should be a PO2 of 40. How come you're still conscious and alive and not dead?
Because of the pressure in the plane.
What about the pressure in the plane?
It's keeping us.
Is that at sea level?
No.
No. They're keeping it pressurized to keep.
To what simulated altitude?
760?
Atmospheric.
7,600 feet?
No, like regular.
So you mean sea level?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that the inside of a cabin is the same pressure as it is at sea level, is what you're saying? Okay, nope, it's not.
Is it above a little bit of sea level?
Well, it's more than a little bit above, right? It used to be a simulated altitude of about 10,000 feet. All right, that's a simulated altitude. Let's just do common sense rule of thumb. If sea level is a partial pressure of 160, is 10,000 feet going to be higher or lower in PO2 values?
Well,
Gonna kick you out, I promise. Right?
Okay,
So if it's lower, how many of you have done long airplane trips, transcontinental? Are you nice and happy and rested when you get there and you feel
No.
great, ready to go?
you're
Maybe a headache, a little nausea, cranky as all hell, right? Low on sleep, because you've been in a partial pressure of lower than sea level for 15, 16, 20 plus hours. Right, so you don't feel good. So airline company said, we can fix that, and we're gonna take you down to maybe about 7,000, 8,000 feet. What have they done to the partial pressure between 10,000 and 8,000 feet? Has the partial pressure gone up or gone down?
Going up.
It's gone up. I've lowered your simulated altitude. I took you from a simulated 10,000 now down to a fake 8,000. All right, I've lowered your altitude. If you lower the altitude, you increase the pressure. If you increase the pressure, you increase the partial pressure. This is why you feel better if you fly certain airline companies compared to others. Some companies have it at 7,000, some have it at 8,000, some haven't even made the adjustments yet. Remember, the higher you go, the lower the PO2. The lower you go, the higher the PO2. Because pressures increase.
Is that why sometimes my feet are swollen running off planes?
To a certain extent, yeah, it's also a lack of pressure and lack of mobility if you've been on a plane for a long, long time.
Is that why your ears pop?
That's for equilibrium pressures, yes. That's just a pressure issue, not a PO2. But you're trying to change the pressure outside the station or one side of the eardrum compared to the other. That's why you have that little station tube that goes to the back of your oral pharynx, and you can then pop the pressure to equalize the pressure on both sides of that little tube. Now, so you guys have the luxury of being in an airplane, right, flying around at that altitude. What if, however, I'm a cheapskate, I don't want to pay for tickets, and I ride the outside of my airplane?
That's not gonna be good.
Yeah.
Well, two interesting stories. My uncle was well, first of all, what is the pressure at 30,000? We don't care, right? What's the temperature at 30,000 feet?
Freezing?
Well, what's cold? I mean, cold is relative.
Negative.
Negative,
Negative 20?
and you're around negative 70, negative 80. All right? It's really, really cold, way the hell up there. Let's just do minus 80. To give you an idea of how cold that is, my uncle was a bottom turret gunner in World War II, B-17 bombers. My uncle's a big guy. How the hell he got in the bottom turret, I've got no freaking idea. But he was he did 25 missions over Europe. And in one of his missions, it was called Black Monday. They lost 60 planes. And in his crew, one of his crewmates got shot in the neck by a machine gun. And as they went to help him, within a matter of seconds, before they actually got to him, the blood had frozen down the side of his torso. Because you're at minus 60 degrees. And when you watch these movies of World War II fighter pilots and bombardiers, they're in these nice big thick leather woolly fuzzy jackets with wires running through them to heat them up electrically. Because there's no way you're going to survive at minus 60 degrees, right? Let alone be shivering and then trying to shoot a machine gun or eyesight of a bomb pilot with this. But why am I telling you this? Well, there was this dumbass kid. You may have heard about him in the news, who got into the wheel well of an airplane and flew to Hawaii. All right? What's he breathing? He's not breathing 10,000 feet. He's breathing 30,000 feet. He's not in a nice 75-degree cabin. He's at minus 60, minus 70, which probably saved his ass. Because when he landed, 5 hours later, he was found walking the tarmac. Confused and delirious, right? But he lived.
Was he delirious from the PO?
He was hypoxic and hypothermic,
Okay.
right?
How did he live then?
Pure luck. Pure luck.
Usually those stowaways don't live.
Huh?
Usually they don't.
Right, exactly. So they're guessing that because he had to cram himself into the fetal position in a wheel well next to the wheels, that somehow kept him warmer and enough. And in fact, he was so cold, lowered his metabolic rate, that the demand for O2 also dropped.
Yeah.
And just right circumstances, because he should have been dead when he landed.
Like any longer, he would have been dead.
Yeah. All right, now let's go back to a little conversation. First, this all makes sense, because we're almost done, but not quite. Okay, let's go back to diving. 99 feet is the depth of recreational diving. If I want to go further, as Dave mentioned earlier, I have to become specialized in what is in my tank. And right, we're going to use helox and triox. We're going to use gas mixtures. And all we're going to do, all right, let's just do deep dive, is take advantage of their knowledge of Henry's gas law. All right, remember Henry's gas law about partial pressures. I know I can't manipulate the pressure of the water around me, but what can I manipulate? Well, I can manipulate this part of my equation, perhaps. And so I can do it maybe like a 60-40 combination, or 60% nitrogen and 40% oxygen. Right? Normally it's this. So if the percent of nitrogen goes down, what happens to the partial pressure of nitrogen? It's also going to go down. Right? Which means I can either A, go down deeper, or spend more time at a shallower depth, but have less concern for that particular depth, because I've lowered the partial pressure of nitrogen. You don't want to breathe pure O2, all right? That's a bad idea. If you breathe pure O2 under deep dive, you're gonna get to the point where you think you're a little mermaid. And you will take the mask off and try and talk to the fish and actually try and breathe water, right? Which you're not gonna be able to do, right? You just get, you get drunk on oxygen.
But you can
Now-
take from nitrogen too.
Yeah. But now there is something that we can do. Besides having these changes in gas mixtures in my tank, if I wanna go really, really deep down, right, industrial levels, down to 300, 500, down to 1,000 feet, I'm not gonna be able to withstand the pressure on my body at 1,000 feet, but they do have these really cool kind of Robbie the Robot dive suits. Think of a spacesuit, but it's in a cloth made out of titanium, which means it's not compressible. All right, I get in this thing and you close the lid on me. I'm at 1 atmosphere inside my little suit. And then you drop me down to 1,000 feet of water depth, and you have all that pressure pushing up against you, right? But it's pushing against the suit, not you. You are in 1 atmosphere. That means the PO2 value is 160 in the air around you. There's no worries about getting the bends, because there's no change in partial pressure since the suit is taking the pressure, not you. But when you're scuba diving, right, the pressure is against you and squeezing you. Now what's interesting is to drum in the idea of squeezing the gases out of you. Does anybody know the world record for free diving? The depth? How much? 200 feet?
I think it's more than that.
300 feet?
Like 400, maybe more.
400 feet? Do I hear 429 feet? Yes, I do. I hear 429 feet. That's a world record. 1 breath. And they go down 429 feet, turn and come back up again. Okay, it's a round trip. Now, when you read about these people, one of the things they mention is the 100-foot mark is the interesting depth. Because you've been compressed so much that to get to the 100 feet, you have to actually work your way down there. But at 100 feet and further, you begin to fall like a rock because you've been so compressed. And the further down you go, the more dense you become, the faster you fall. Which is why if you die, you'll never come back up. You'll just keep sinking and sinking and sinking and sinking and getting crushed and crushed and crushed and crushed. Now, I want to impress upon you the coolness of this idea. Recreational diving is 100 feet. Anybody know how far down sperm whales can dive?
Like 3,000?
Too shallow. 7,000 to 8,000 feet. Think of the pressure exerted against them and the physiology needed to live at that depth, right? And whale seals can do the same thing, right? Really deep, deep dives. But now, I can go really deep in a suit, that's cool, right? But I want to take a step back and talk about what if I want to be able to hang around at 66 feet for a long period of time and not worry about getting the bends and maybe even not even leave any air bubbles. Be stealthy and be sneaky. Well, the Navy SEALs found a way of being able to spend lots of time underwater by breathing a liquid. We're going to be looking at liquid ventilation. I'm going to have to pull the screen out, then we'll put it back up, you guys take photographs. But this idea of liquid ventilation. All right, break the word down. What does ventilation mean? Oh my God, everybody. What does ventilation mean? Not breathing. What's the definition of ventilation? What's in and out of the lungs?
Air.
The movement of air. But now this is called liquid ventilation. So what's moving in and out of your lungs instead of air? A liquid, all right? The liquid is known as a perfluorocarbon, otherwise known as PFCs, not private first class. Now, with that, I want to show you first a little bit of Hollywood. Yeah, that will work. brighter, thank you very much. Okay, let's go to here, let's go here. How's my sound?
Good. What is all this stuff? Fluid breathing system. We just got it. You use it when you go really deep. How deep? Deep. How deep? It's classified. Anyway, they breathe liquid so you can't get compressed. The pressure doesn't catch you. You mean you got liquid in your lungs? Oxygenated fluorocarbon emulsion. Bullshit. Check this out. What are you doing? Hey, no. You're gonna kill her. It's okay, I've done this myself. Oh man, what are you just drowning her? She's gonna be fine. I breathed this myself. Gonna be fine. No man, she's gonna drown. Look, she's freaking out. She's going through a normal adjustment period. What am I supposed to know to you? She's gonna drown. Taking the fluid into his lungs. Taking the fluid into his lungs. Here he goes. A little bit of anxiety here. Now he's starting to relax. He's breathing fine. See his chest moving? Getting plenty of oxygen. Damn rat's breathing and shit. Hey, no bullshit. Hands down. The goddamn thing I ever saw. See, the fluid's hard to push in and out of thin air. It's a little more work to breathe. He's doing fine. You digging it? She's doing it. She ain't digging it. All right, let her out. Now. Okay, all right. Okay, now we let the fluid drain from his...
Now there's that. And then there's this. I need to kill the lights, make sure you guys can really see that there's kind of a dull version here. This is later in the movie, this is the star of the movie, and ignore the stupid romance between he and she. They're split up and divorced and trying to get back together again, but who cares about love stories?
Oh, wonderful.
Right? But he is now in an aqua suit, and he apparently is going to be liquid ventilating. This is what the
Relax.
Whoa.
Relax now, man.
This is what the Navy had their SEALs do. You get in a suit, you put the helmet on, and you fill the suit with this PFC fluid. You force yourself to drown yourself in the liquid. You ventilate this. There's no air in that helmet. It's purely full of liquid.
Relax. Watch me.
Sorry.
Doing fine. Now don't hold your breath. Take it in. Just let yourself take it in. Take it in. That's it. Oh, man. Don't hold your breath now. Take it in. There you go. Look good. Take it in. That's it. There you go. Pass in a second. It's perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal. We all breathe liquid for 9 months, bud. Your body will remember. That's it. That's it.
And that was the argument that the Navy had. They thought, you guys used to ventilate liquid before you were born. Right? You're actually ventilating amniotic fluid in and out, strengthening your diaphragm and your external intercostals and your internals, your scalenes, your pecs. You're giving them exercise before you actually get out into the real world. Now what's interesting is, as much as I really enjoyed this actor, who did lots of other cool movies, he's a coward. Because he didn't do this. It's all trick photography, right? There's a chamber between him and the helmet, and the chamber was full of fluid. He's inside a nice little air thing. I mean, trick photography is really, really cool. I mean, it even allows you to maybe do things like this with your stories of rats. Except for the fact that they did not do that to the rat. This rat was literally drowned in PFC. This rat is literally ventilating liquid. When you watch the film and you see that the camera cuts from the rat to the actor back to the rat, because the rat was so freaking freaked out. I don't blame the poor little thing. It was defecating, urinating, and vomiting in the fluid. They had to keep changing the fluid so it's a nice clear shot for people to watch, right? But it actually was, I mean, when you watch this thing is actually submerged and it is literally ventilating.
She's gonna drown. Taking the fluid into his lungs.
It is literally ventilating.
Taking the fluid into his lungs.
And the comment that he makes about being harder to breathe is quite true. And I want you guys to have some experience with this. So go home tonight, fill the bathtub up full of water. No, don't get in the damn thing, right? Put your hands under the surface of the water and move your arms back and forth underwater. Feel the resistance of the water, right? Now pull your hands above the water and move them above the water. Feel the lack of resistance. Now imagine trying to pull air in, how easy it is. Now try and pull liquid in, how much harder it is. You have to force inhalate and force ventilate the entire time. The Navy SEALs were struggling with this because they made them much larger chest muscles, right? All the muscles needed for respiration were now increased. The fluid didn't bog because we made it so it was isotonic and stuff. And probably thanks to the joy of most SEALs, right around the corner came ROVs and submersibles and remote controlled drones. They didn't really have to be able to do this. But I want to advance this, right? Here you saw a scene of a rat ventilating liquid. So, what if instead of the rat sucking in the fluid, I pump the fluid in and I pump the fluid, what do I ventilate for you? Push the fluid in, push the fluid out. Then you don't have to ventilate. So we're going to take this to the next little step. I can turn the lights on, the sunlight's on for this. This is a researcher from Temple University.
Person with a normal lung in an unusual environment. My interest was, rather than taking a person with a normal lung and putting them in an unusual environment, like under the water, 80 atmospheres, my idea was that maybe we could take someone that has an abnormal lung and make it better. And the line of thinking there was that when you're a baby, you're developing in your mother's womb, you're in a fluid environment and your lungs are filled with fluid. And the problem is sometimes babies are pulling way premature and their lungs aren't developed enough. And they have to make a transition from this fluid environment that they're in to breathing a gas environment.
So what is not developed? They don't have septal cells. Don't have septal cells, what are you not producing? You're not producing surfactant, what are you not reducing? The surface tension inside your lungs. You don't have the ability to inhale. So what if we inhale for you by forcing fluid into your lungs? This fluid can hold 300 times the level of oxygen and the level of CO2. Has a high saturation ability for both O2 and CO2. So they're investigating the ability of actually ventilating premature babies who don't have the ability to breathe air. Because we know you breathe liquid. So we take you back to that environment. We totally submerge you underwater, right? And we ventilate you with this really high saturated fluid.
And unfortunately, they can't make that transition because their lungs aren't lined with the right kind of biochemical fluids, the structure of the lung isn't developed right. So I just happened to be in a place where these two ideas came together. There's this liquid breathing for diving, and then there's this problem we're having with babies not being able to breathe. And I put those two things together and said, well, let's try taking these premature babies and make them breathe a fluid until their lungs are ready to breathe the gas. So they make a transition from one fluid environment to another fluid environment to gas breathing. And basically that's what we did. We started off in terms of premature animal studies, lambs that were born prematurely. We would have them breathe this fluid and demonstrated that they could do it very effectively and not have any lung injury or any complications for breathing it. And after we did enough of those kinds of preclinical studies, then we decided that we were going to start some clinical studies. And there were lots of babies that were having great difficulty in breathing in terms of they were born at 24 weeks of gestation, where normally you're born at 40 weeks of gestation. So their lungs aren't developed enough, their bodies aren't developed enough, they can't breathe. And at that time, and this was 1989, we decided to, here at Temple, we were going to embark on these first clinical studies of taking the liquids that we were working with. These liquids are called perfluorochemicals, and they're synthesized compounds which dissolve a lot of oxygen in it and a lot of carbon dioxide so that you can breathe this liquid just as well as you can breathe a gas. And in fact, if you have immature lungs or damaged lungs, you can actually breathe this liquid better than you can breathe a gas. And so that's when we first started doing the clinical studies. And we started with a series of studies in premature babies, and then worked our way up to pediatric population with kids that had injured lungs and couldn't breathe gas very well, and then to adults that had problems with breathing. And so basically it started with a concept that was related to diving and underwater research and worked its way into the medical world. What we really hope is that we're still in a situation where there are lots of patients that aren't doing well. If you look at adult respiratory distress, there's still about 30% of all those patients that get adult respiratory distress that die. And then out of the ones that survive, there's a lot of morbidity in terms of chronic lung disease and neurological complications. Same thing with the pediatric and the neonatal population. There's a very large percentage of people that even though they survive conventional gas ventilation and their stay in the intensive care unit, there's what we call morbidity or problems associated with that. And what I would hope for is that we would have the opportunity to offer this therapy to more patients such that we can reduce that morbidity and have them get through this illness without having the complications that they see.
Now, add to that an extension of concepts. One of the problems with heart surgery, open heart surgery, heart transplants, organ transplants, is I have to minimize blood loss and minimize the demand for oxygen carrying capacity. I have to basically kind of somehow slow down your metabolic activity. So one of the things that they do is they pack you in ice, right? They're gonna lower your temperature down to lower your metabolic rate. They're gonna pack you in ice and they're gonna cool you from the outside in. It takes time to do. So somebody had a brilliant idea. Let's add this concept to something else.
Suspended animation in care research presents the next generation in therapeutic hypothermia. The revolutionary portable liquid ventilation system, the fastest minimally invasive way to cool cardiac arrest patients in the hospital and in the field. Within minutes of cardiac arrest, the interruption of normal blood flow called ischemia starves the brain and vital organs of oxygen and nutrients. There are a number of medical techniques used to induce therapeutic levels of hypothermia, but none can be administered as simply and cool as effectively as the portable liquid ventilation system. Packing a patient in ice or ice water drops brain temperature a few degrees over several hours. If skilled medical professionals are available to catheterize or cannulate a patient for cold lavage or cardiac bypass, these procedures can take 35 minutes to an hour to cool the brain by 3 degrees. But using the liquid ventilation system, first responders can produce this temperature drop in as little as 15 minutes, without an ice bath and without invasive procedures. Why is liquid ventilation so much faster and more effective? Because it uses the patient's own lungs as powerful heat exchangers. First, an endotracheal tube is placed into the airway of the patient. With cardiac rhythm restored or supported mechanically, the liquid ventilation system's delivery tube is connected and the system is activated. The system's computer then begins delivering carefully controlled cycles of ice-cold liquid and oxygen in and out of the patient's lungs. The liquid is a perfluorocarbon that does not damage the lungs. It supports both rapid heat exchange and gas exchange.
What they're showing right here then is the warmer liquid that has spent time in your lungs, absorbing the heat from your body, right, is now going to be pumped out. So we're going to begin to drop your temperature. And I keep pumping the warmer liquid out, and I keep resupplying with colder liquid.
As all of the body's blood passes through nearly 70 square meters of the lung surface area, the ice-cold perfluorocarbon removes heat and delivers oxygen. Cooled blood from the lungs then circulates normally to the brain and the rest of the body, cooling tissues as it travels. Warm perfluorocarbon from the patient's lungs cycles back to the liquid ventilation system. A heat exchanger submerged in ice water cools it again before recycling it to the patient. Sensors carefully monitor the patient's temperature and continue liquid ventilation cycling until the desired degree of protective hypothermia is achieved.
That's
Now, picture what they're doing. They're pumping a cold liquid into the alveolus. What's right outside the alveolus? Your pulmonary capillaries, right where your temperature is. And so why does anything go from place to place? Gradient. Well, not pressure, but just gradients. Now you have a thermal gradient, right? The heat from the blood will then be transferred into the liquid, and we pump that liquid out, taking the heat with it. Bring in another batch of cold liquid to always maintain the gradient of always being colder in the lungs than in the blood by your pulmonary capillaries, right? And this is what allows them or us to actually then drop your temperature. Now there's one other application to this that they don't have on here, that I have not yet found a video for. Now don't say that, do not say it out loud, Dave, Taz, hush. But can you think of another application, same principle, but for a different scenario? And what might that be?
Like hypothermia? Or is that filled out?
So, what is hypothermia?
Where you're not getting enough heat, essentially, but
Also, how do you become hypothermic?
getting cold water.
yeah, being in cold water.
How would I get in cold water? Just humor me.
Okay, so just falling in underneath, like when it's frozen.
So you go ice fishing
Yeah.
and you're an idiot, you fall through the ice and you get into 35-degree water. And it takes us 30 minutes to get to you. Or you're a little kid who goes across the pond, you fall in, and 6 miles later, under ice, we drag you out of the frozen river, right? And you're very, very hypothermic. How do they warm you up?
Blankets.
Well, yeah, usually blankets and stuff.
Blankets and hot water bottles, right? In an emergency situation, if you guys, ever have to go through this, the basic idea is, screw modesty, right? The healthy person takes their clothes off, the cold person takes their clothes off, and it's body-to-body heat transfer, right? You will get cold really, really fast, because your heat's going into that colder person, but it's their life versus just being warm. Well, is there a more efficient way of doing that? It takes a while. Why not simply just, instead of pumping in cold liquid, you pump in heated liquid? Heat you from the inside out. Be a lot faster. And so now let's add something else to this little idea. Because they're pumping this liquid into my lungs that can carry lots of O2, carry lots of CO2, and there's a capillary bed right next door to all these alveoluses. Could I do anything else with this fluid maybe? You're stepping out of the sandbox and expanding, using your imagination, creativity. What if I just put nutrients in that solution? I can give you O2, I can remove your CO2, and I can give you glucose. Maybe even some fatty acids, some lipid-soluble material. Maybe that's how I'm going to get to Mars. I can't bring enough oxygen. So what if they put you in one of these little chambers? Why not? If I want to go to a further distant planet, right? Or I want to suspend you until we have enough science to heal you. Right? We lower your metabolic rate, we chill you, we pump you full of fluid, we maintain your nutrient levels until we have the science necessary, or at least the donor availability to do the heart transplant, or if we're getting out to getting Congress to get off their ass and allow for stem cell and 3D printing, I can print my own heart until they're done printing it. I'll be in this nice little environment where they're maintaining my stability until my own heart has been grown. Then I can just put that inside of me. Scott, you had your hand up a moment ago.
This made me think of the movie Demolition Man, where they freeze him.
Yeah, I've never seen that, but I do remember some science fiction scenes where it might have been a Star Wars or something where,
Luke got his hand cut off and they grew a new one.
and or also where they're in this big gigantic tank submerged and they have this little thing going to their mouth. Well, instead of putting the thing into your mouth, why not just submerge you in a PSC solution, right? And let you be suspended while they do these machines that stitch you back up again, and regrow your tissues for you in that sense. So that's what I want you guys to be exposed to, the idea of liquid ventilation, right? Realize what they said at Temple University. Watch the lights as I turn them back on. This isn't just for premature babies. It's for kids, it's for adults, burn victims, trauma victims, where it's better for us to actually ventilate you with a liquid rather than having you ventilate yourself. And remember, your lungs are divided into these little bronchial pulmonary segments. So maybe this lobe isn't working too well. Put a tube all the way down in there and just ventilate that one little section, if I need to. I mean, it's limitless in terms of how we can do this. All right, that's all I wanted to talk to you guys about.
That's all.
That's all. That wasn't much, you know? Right? Crowded, but photograph it, right? I'm not going to ask you guys to draw this out. No way in hell, right? But there's lots of questions we can get from it, like, you know, how does water pressure change as I go down? How does atmospheric pressure change as I go up? How do partial pressures change? What gas law does that involve in? What's the likelihood of me surviving riding the outside of an airplane, and why would it work or not work? Right, we got Boyle's law, we got Henry's law. What law's not up here that you're never going to use as an answer on an exam? There's no Dalton's law, right? Make sure the idea of a hyperbaric chamber makes sense to you. Why the idea of the bends makes sense, because you don't have to be underwater. All you have to experience is an increase in pressure. Does anybody know how they first started to notice the problem with the bends? Much?
They're
No? Building the Brooklyn Bridge, the foundation for it. They were digging a foothold over 100 feet deep. Over 100 feet. The workers would climb back out at the end of the night and have the bends. That's an increase in pressure.
Were people dying?
So I think some died, yeah. But everything were not very happy and complaining lots of headaches and joint pain. All right, you guys are on your own. Toward the end, we'll hand back lab tests. Toward the end, I want you guys to work. I'm mean, I'm cruel, I'm heartless.